Hey everyone, welcome back to the iGaming experience. I'm your host, Sam Batty, as always, recording here in the Zebra Studios in beautiful Podgorica, Montenegro. And today I'm talking to you about one of the biggest core principles in the entire industry, literally. And that's the idea that every successful operator is powered by two key engines that go hand in hand. Number one, acquisition. And number two, retention. Acquisition, retention. If you've never really thought about acquisition and retention beyond like simplifying a registration form or slapping a loyalty program on your site, then this episode should be somewhat eye-opening for you. This goes way deeper than get as many signups as possible, right? That's just step one. Yes, you've got to get people in the door, but then you've got to keep them inside, right? And make them want to come back. So that's the acquire and the retain. They go, as I said, hand in hand. I'd go so far as to say that acquisition without retention is basically like lighting money on fire, right? And good retention without a steady flow of new players, your business will eventually stagnate and just fade out. But we're not going to let that happen. So today, I'm going to break down what each engine actually does, and most importantly, how they work together. There are a lot of moving parts on both sides, and beginners and even seasoned pros, everyone in this industry has the potential to miss some of the ways that acquisition and retention rely on each other. So I'm going to do my best to give you everything that I know about it. As I always say, I'm still learning here too. So feel free to educate me. You know, if I give you everything I know about it and you've got something better, holler at your boy, right? Okay, let's start with the big picture. Okay, let's zoom out here. An operator is in a constant balancing act between bringing new players in and keeping existing players active. So, as I said before, acquisition is how you get players to the door. Retention is how you get them to stay. And implementing these two things takes completely different skill sets, even though they're so closely aligned. You can have the best acquisition strategy in the world, right? You can be spending huge money on affiliates and influencers and paid traffic and have, great results there. But if your retention is weak, those players that you worked so hard to acquire will walk away after, one session or two. Now, on the flip side, you can have amazing retention, right? Killer CRM, you can have strong product features, you can have super fun promotions. But if you never invest in acquisition, your base shrinks. Your revenue is going to drop. And suddenly you're going to have everyone asking each other, hey, what happened? Thought we were killing it here. So the real strength of an operator isn't about choosing one of these two engines. It's about getting both working in harmony together. Like, okay, this might be silly, but think about it like a two-person beach volleyball team. You've got acquisition that's setting, and you've got retention that's spiking it. Right? Boom. If they're not in sync, then they're just tapping balls in the air until they eventually hit the sand. Right? That might be silly. I was trying to think of a team sport with two because I figured beach volleyball works. Yeah, I think I've stretched that analogy as far as it can go, but you get what I'm saying here, right? You need one to set up the other, and it's a bit of a cycle that we're with one engine supporting the other. So this is why I'm talking about both of them in this same episode. Okay, so let's dive into acquisition first. When people talk about acquisition, especially traditionally, they'll think of ads like banners, banner ads, Google ads, Facebook, Instagram, which quite honestly happen to like my Instagram ads. I think they do a great job. I almost go on Instagram just for the ads. That's for another podcast. So those traditional methods, that's kind of what people used to think, right? They still do. Maybe a lot of people still do them predominantly, but today in almost every industry, people have gotten used to influencers having big followings, right? We know that everyone knows the word influencer, and you've got influencers that with massive followings, they're getting brand deals and just, being influential. And iGaming is no different, right? We like our influencers on the side as well. It's a growing segment. And like most other industries, it's just becoming more and more of a factor. However, acquisition in iGaming, I would say, is much broader than most industries. Influencers are just a part of the big drivers of traffic on iGaming sites. I know that's true for other industries as well, but hey, man, we're on an iGaming podcast. We're special, okay? I would say, like, the biggest drivers of traffic by far are affiliates. And when I say influencers are basically a subset of affiliates. Now, if you know absolutely nothing about affiliates in this industry, pause this episode or make a note and go learn. Right? They're that important. In fact, I would recommend you to check out episode 3 of this podcast with Artyom Matavosian from Partner Matrix. He dropped some great affiliate knowledge there, and he's just a cool guy. So worth checking it out. Shout out Artyom. I'm sure I've got this on my list, but I'm not remembering it. But I probably need to do a whole episode just on affiliates. Noted. Okay. All right. And then beyond affiliates, right? They're not everything. There's literally everything else, right? So you've got paid ads, as I mentioned before. You've got SEO. You've got social media content. You've got sponsorships with teams and other organizations. Sometimes you've got entire media companies that are built purely to push traffic. If you don't know what I mean, look up the streaming service Kick. Right? Shout out Steak. And for the newbies, just so I don't confuse anyone, I used the term SEO a couple times just now. That stands for search engine optimization. So, which is just basically optimizing your website using different tools available to you to show up at the top of Google or other search engines. But like, honestly, that term SEO, it's getting a little bit dated with the rise of search and AI. And that's another episode I need to do. I have spoken before about the future of iGaming and AI and how they're going to merge together, but keeps coming up. And there's more to it. It's there's something new every day. So yeah, I think another episode on that is coming. I might need to bring in a marketing expert for that one. I think that would make more sense, actually. A marketing expert that understands AI. Okay. Again, noted. All right. So back to the matter at hand. Let's talk money. Right? Acquisition in iGaming is expensive. Right? You're not paying for just like a click, like you might in e-commerce. You're paying for compliance. Right? You're paying for like KYC verification. Know your customer. You've heard me mention that before. You're also paying payment provider fees. You're paying for players who deposit once and then disappear. And then, as of course, you've got fraudsters and bonus abusers and syndicates and Sharpies. And then you've also got genuine high quality players too. They all cost money to acquire. All of them. Now, okay, how much money are you asking? Well, that will depend big time on the region you're targeting. Okay, but to give you some ballpark numbers, so to have something to work with, you're looking at anywhere from, let's say $20 in the lowest value region to upwards of $300 or $400 or $500 in higher value regions. And that's per player acquired, those numbers. So when an operator is trying to acquire thousands of players, any reduction in those costs have a pretty massive impact on the bottom line. So successful operators take acquisition extremely seriously, right? They're not looking at how many signups did we get this week. I mean, they are, but they're also taking that data and then they want to look at how many signups did we get this week and what are those players worth over time. And then they look for marketing opportunities that cost less and deliver more. In fact, we have some terms just for all of that. So this is a beginner podcast, so let me slow down and break it down a little bit, right? It's important acronym time. And I would suggest locking these in. So if you've been doing something else while you're listening to this podcast, listen up a little bit here. So you've got CPA, you've got FTD, and you've got LTV. Okay, these are all metrics that are used to measure the value of a player throughout their expected time as a customer, right? So basically, how much return do you get on each player that you acquire on average, right? And let me break down those acronyms. I'm not just going to throw them at you. I'm going to explain them a little bit. So CPA, in fact, I should say CPA has like kind of a double meaning in the industry, but in this case, CPA stands for cost per acquisition, right? In fact, this will probably come up on the affiliate podcast, but CPA on that side stands for cost per action, which is a metric that affiliates might use to bill. But that's getting outside the subject of this episode. So CPA stands for cost per acquisition. In iGaming, that almost always means the player has registered and deposited. Right? Sometimes it's just registered, but usually it requires both. Both of those things have to happen for it to count. Right? Sometimes there's even a minimum wager added to that equation as well. So the player has to deposit, register, deposit, and bet a certain amount for companies to count that as an acquisition. But you've got the idea. Generally, that's how a CPA is counted. In fact, there's a related acronym that I should also include here, just because you'll hear it and it might be confusing if you're in this part of the industry. So I said CPA, right? You've got cost per acquisition. There's a related one, which is CAC. Most people will, if they say it out loud, they'll call it CAC, right? CAC or CAC is similar to CPA, but it's bigger. Okay, so again, CAC stands for customer acquisition cost. You can think of the CPA, right, the cost per acquisition, as one singular deal with one traffic source, right? So whether that's an affiliate or an influencer or traditional marketing channel like Google, that's where you would be charting your CPA, right? Or tracking it. Where did that come from? Whereas customer acquisition cost is more inclusive. It's everything. So it's what did you spend on the marketing, on salaries, on branding, on tools, sponsorships, and then you divide that by the number of new depositing customers. So it's a both numbers will tell you a different story in some cases, and depending on who you are, like your head of marketing is going to be more interested in the CPA, and your CFO is going to be more interested in the CAC or the CAC. Right. So, as I said, CPA it's just one piece of the puzzle, whereas CAC is the whole puzzle. At least that's my understanding. These definitions, as I said, can vary subtly from company to company and person to person. But generally, again, you've got the idea. Okay, so back to the acronyms. I also said FTD, which is first-time depositor, first-time depositor. This is when someone becomes a real money customer. I think that one it pretty much explains itself, right? Someone's registered and they've deposited for the first time. Now they've actually put money on your site. All right, and the last acronym that I mentioned before is LTV, which stands for lifetime value. So this is the total value a player generates over their entire lifespan with your company after bonuses and fees. So basically, this is calculated on NGR. In fact, talked about GGR a lot. I've not mentioned NGR for a few episodes, but hopefully you started listening to this podcast from the beginning. And if you did, you would already know that NGR stands for net gaming revenue. Right? We're not going to totally break it down, but simply put, that's your take-home profit. If you need more info on NGR, check out my episode, iGaming 101. I think I called it on industry jargon. That's like one of the first few pods. So check that one out. All right. So if your CPA, your cost per acquisition, is $300 per player, and your expected lifetime value per player is $1,000, pretty simple math, right? You're going to be making $700 on that player. And obviously there's lots of other costs involved, but at least it's a good start to see that the math works. You're acquiring players profitably, and you can set your marketing budgets and other financial forecasts with at least something to work with. All right? These numbers are not set in stone. They will vary, but they're just benchmarks to help you set expectations. Okay. So now you've got an idea of how acquisition is thought of from an operator's perspective, but there's a lot more to it. I've given you some numbers and some terms, but like, what is acquisition really about? Right? I know I've probably answered that 3 or 4 times in this podcast, or you think I have, but let me just go a little bit deep. Like most advertising, acquisition is firstly about attracting attention. Okay, you've got to cut through the noise somehow, right? As you know, Gary Vee, who's signed the shoe that's above my shoulder, he will often go on about that. If you've never heard of Gary Vee, I won't do an aside now, but pretty interesting entrepreneur and speaker, so worth checking out. Very polarizing character. I've gotten some value out of him, so worth checking him out, I think. All right, so you've cut through the noise. You're trying to get attention, and while you're doing that, you also have to pay attention to being authentic, right, and building trust. And then on top of that, while building trust, you need to make it incredibly easy for a new player to join you, right, to sign up and deposit. And in other industries, there's a lot less friction, but with all of the laws around gambling advertising and regulator requirements for registration and KYC, like, that's not a simple needle to thread. That's where you need a team that has experience and is willing to get a little bit creative. So once you've got all that figured out, you remember, right, that acquisition is only the beginning. Time for part 2 now. The operators that scale, right, the ones that become major brands, tier 1 brands, they understand that acquisition is just the front door, right? Retention is the house that they live in, and that's what they're focusing their energy on making beautiful and making attractive. So let's talk about retention now. Right? I think this is the engine that most people underestimate. They think the product should do the job of keeping the players happy and active, right? But while that's a big part of the game, that's not all of it. Retention is everything that happens after the player lands on your site. It's how you get players to stay, to keep playing, to trust your brand, and to actually enjoy the experience. If you've got your departments working well together, then a lot of product innovations should be coming as recommendations from the retention team. That's right. They're someone on the front lines here. So you've got fast payments. You've got a strong bonus engine. You've got a CRM strategy that actually makes sense for your target market. right? You've got email and SMS and push notification and pop-ups and in-app triggers, and you know, challenges and leaderboards and all these things, tournaments and missions. You got good UX and UI, right? But you got to ask yourself even more, right? So all these things you've got, but you got to say, okay, is there a good selection of games and sports? What order are they shown in? Are we communicating clearly? Right? These people that you've got, your users, they're like a guest at your party. And you want to make sure that they feel welcome, they feel comfortable, right? And they want to stick around and mingle and head over to the snack table, maybe get a drink or two. So if acquisition is about getting players in, retention is really about giving them a reason to stay. That's probably what I should have said. It's like just giving them a reason to stick around. So lock in this idea here. This is an important one, right? It is counterintuitive, but operators don't live off of that first deposit. And a lot of people think, well, I don't know if a lot of people think this. Maybe I'm just projecting, but I feel like a lot of people feel like you've won the race when someone's come in and deposited once, right? But again, I'll go back to the acronym, the LTV, right? The operators live off the lifetime value, right? So the acquisition is just the beginning. All right, let's get a tiny bit deeper. Every player in iGaming goes through pretty much the same psychological journey, right? Even if they don't realize it. Right. So there's curiosity. They're like, oh, what's this new brand? Let me check this out. And then if they like it, maybe there's some excitement, like let me try a few games, or place a bet, or give this one a spin. And then they're thinking about it. They're evaluating. Do I like it here? Does this feel trustworthy? And that's usually when they hit the decision point. Do I stay or do I leave? All right. So acquisition gets the player through the curiosity and the excitement. Right? So you're knocking out those two things with your acquisition. You've already got them there. You've got them on the site. But now retention is what carries them through that evaluation and then eventually the loyalty stage. So you've given them reasons to stick around. They decide to stick around. And if you continue to give them reasons to stick around, that translates into loyalty and they become your long-term customers. And then that LTV, you know what? That can go way up. That's just an estimate. Right? And a key point here on retention, which I think is important to think about, is retention doesn't start after the first time deposit. Right? So it literally starts the moment they land on your site. So if your UX is messy, if your sign-up flow is confusing, if your bonuses are unclear or they don't work, right? If your sports book is loading slowly, or it takes too long for bets to be booked. I mean, the player has kind of already made their decision before they even deposit, right? And you've kind of made the decision for them. So retention really, it should begin before the player even knows it's happening. They're just looking around. They're not even there yet, and there's a hint of retention hitting them up, right? If you looked at the Venn diagram of retention and acquisition, they're not sitting next to each other. There's some legit crossover there. Now, let's talk about how operators actually manage both engines at the same time, because this is where the real strategy comes in. Right? Smart operators start by making acquisition efficient. So that starts with, they targeting the right markets, understanding player value, right? LTV, avoiding regions where the payment costs are really high or the fraud risk is really high. All important things to consider there. And once you've got that stable and efficient, right? So once acquisition is flowing nicely, then a successful operator should start pouring their energy into retention, right? So improving the UX and strengthening the CRM and, making withdrawals smoother and running better promotions and just, making the brand feel alive, like this party is happening and it's going to keep on happening. You don't want to leave, or at least if you leave, you're going to want to come back. Basically, the best operators are getting these two engines to like feed each other, right? I guess this is what I'm trying to say with the overlap. So let's talk about it from a more organic side, okay? Because I think this might translate to more people. A great retention experience creates word of mouth acquisition, right? So think about that. If you've ever had a great experience with, and forget iGaming, just any company at all, if they've gone a little bit above and beyond to treat you well or to, you know, make you happy as a customer, how many people did you tell about? How many people do you big up that company to? And, you know, how often do the words "I'm a customer for life" come out of your mouth? I mean, maybe not, but I've got a few of those companies in my life where even if they, you know, come up with an inferior product, I would have difficulty switching because they've been so good to me in the past. So what does that mean on the iGaming side, right? What's a good retention experience? Well, you know, we're online. We're not hanging out and interacting with the players every day. You know, you're trying to, which is, again, another episode I should bring on about you know, customer engagement. But initially, you know, you got to have your suite of gamification tools, right? Some social experiences, like I was just mentioning, new games, right? People want things that are interesting and popping. Ideally, fast withdrawals and fun missions and trying to personalize things. Players talk, affiliates notice, influencers notice. Word of mouth is big. It might not feel that way online, and I guess it might help to think of word of mouth not necessarily as being in the same room and telling someone. Word of mouth can be messaging someone about it, right? Which people do all the time, influencer or not. All right, and then another key thing to consider here for the operator, especially, is like a strong acquisition strategy brings in more data. So you have more segments, you have more insights, and that just lets your retention get sharper and sharper if you're analyzing that data. It's a feedback loop, right? Acquisition drives retention, retention multiplies acquisition, and we keep going. And this is what I was talking about with scale, right? Operators that really know how to marry these two things together, they're going to blow up. They're going to have the hottest party on the block, right? All right. So if you're new to the industry or if you're just new to this topic, here's what I would say is the biggest lesson. You cannot truly understand iGaming until you understand both of these engines, acquisition and retention. They're that critical. You need to know how players arrive and why they stay. Right? You also need to understand how affiliates think and how CRM teams think. You need to understand how a bonus attracts a player. Seems simple, but this is something you got to wrap your head around. And also how a badly designed one can destroy retention. What makes a good bonus? What makes a bad bonus? Well, spoiler alert, a couple of episodes from now, I will be talking about bonus engines in depth. So stay tuned for that. I'm not breaking it down here. But really, you know, if you're working in this industry, if you're understanding acquisition and retention, right, then regardless of what department you're in, you're going to have some benefits, right? If you're in tech, it's going to help you build features that actually matter, right? If you're in marketing, this is the more obvious one. This helps you acquire players who will stick around, right? If you're in customer support, this helps you understand the emotional journey your players are going through. And that should help shape your answers and make your job a lot easier. So, like, there's not an acquisition department and there's not a retention department. Right? They're like two lenses that should be shaping every decision inside an operator. Right? So they touch on, really, they do touch on every department. So to pull everything together, Acquisition is how players find you. Retention is why they stay. And the operators who win in this industry are the ones who master both. Pretty simple. I mean, it's pretty simple to say. It's a simple concept to understand. It's very complex to execute, right? But the key distinction here is that we're talking not just one of these engines, just the other. It's harmony between the two. So important. So if you're new to iGaming, or if you don't know what I'm talking about here, study both engines. I'm not new to iGaming. I know what I'm talking about here, and I still study both engines because I'm trying to get better. Right? Understand how people enter the funnel. Understand why they leave it. See where the money is earned. See where it's lost. And where long-term value actually lives. And that's it. I think that's it. I think I've covered it. I think I've dropped most of the knowledge that I have. If I miss something, drop a comment wherever you're watching this, or shoot me an email, sam@zebrasolutions.me. I would love to hear about it. And shout out to all of the international listeners. It's actually quite fun. There's not a huge audience, to be honest, that's checking out this podcast so far. But what I love is each time I check the analytics, there's a very even spread across the world. It is super interesting. Like, there's people in Vietnam, and there's people in South Africa, and there's people all over the United States and the United Kingdom. Not so many here in Montenegro, actually. I think I give it most of the data for Montenegro. But yeah, shout out to you wherever you're finding this. So well done on getting to the end of yet another episode of the iGaming Experience. I'm your host, Sam Batty, coming to you from the Zebra Studios in Podgorica, Montenegro, and I will catch you next week. Cheers.